there's a reason there hasn't been another 9/11 since 9/11. And it's because these guys had to they had to get real dirty, right?
I would push back on that. I
Send
would
it.
disagree.
Send it.
The CIA was clearly covering for whatever happened in 9/11. Not the whole CIA, but factions within them. Like, we have very clear documentation that Able Danger, this program that was designated to watch Mohammed Atta and the terror cells that were coming over here, they had reams and reams of documentation. They were tracking these terrorists, and on multiple occasions, CIA officers intervened and stopped the communication of intel that needed to get from one place to the other, and was like, and from every indication, those terrorists had advanced warning that they were being surveilled and moved around. And it also just so happens that there was these Israeli art student spy cells that got uncovered that were also just happened to sort of be in the exact same place as all of these Muslim terror cells, like moving around the country with them, surveilling them. And so there's like all these complex surveillance networks that were going on.
Do you think the CIA allowed 9/11 to happen?
I think that my closest guess right now, and it's definitely a guess because there's so many factors, we do not know what happened. But my closest guess right now is that I think that probably sort of Israeli deep state forces or actors sort of like fed the opportunity or the idea of 9/11 to bin Laden, or offered a partnership or some sort of like, nudge to get him to, go for the idea. Bin Laden or his cells probably had some involvement in the planning and the architecting of like the official stories version, which is this little tiny piece of what the whole thing was. But then around that, I think that there was huge amounts of Israeli and CIA surveillance to make sure that it was going to work and to make sure that no one got in the way. And when the Muslim terrorists, the Muslim terrorists were getting all their visas from a embassy run by the CIA in Saudi Arabia, I think it was. I could be mistaken on that. We have pretty clear documentation that all those terrorists were just given their visas like crazy by this one like sort of like diplomatic outpost, and which is well known that like the CIA gives out visas to terrorists all the time because we're always trying to use terrorists to do our dirty work all over the world. And then when they get to America, they have Israeli and CIA intelligence just like surrounding them and like keeping tabs on them, but they're always somehow just kind of going on to the next thing. And then when you actually get to the event itself, aside from having FBI documentation of the dancing Israelis that were clearly filming the attack and knew about it in advance, and probably were just one of several film crews around, aside from that, like the whole cover-up of the building collapse, the metal getting shipped out, Building 7 collapsing, just all these like elements of the investigation and the setup of the investigation that were clearly there to obfuscate what really happened, that just like is not a thing that just terrorists could ever accomplish. And I think that everyone has a sense of it was some sort of an inside job. But I think there's this cognitive dissonance in the middle of the 9/11 question that doesn't really make sense. That how would you convince Americans to go along with that? Right?
Yeah.
Like, how would you ever convince CIA officers to help Muslim terrorists bomb thousands of American citizens in broad daylight and innocent civilians? That's like so evil. You can't imagine any network of CIA operatives being a part of that.
Exactly.
And then you realize it was Israel. And like, there was certainly some CIA involvement, but these operations are highly compartmentalized. I doubt that very many of the CIA assets really knew what they were a part of.
Interesting.
As well as probably the Israeli assets too. I bet that most of the Israeli assets just knew they were a part of something. But like when you look at how Israelis speak about Americans and about, Muslims and about everyone else, like Israelis have no problem saying totally bloodthirsty things about other parts of the world. And there's a famous clip on 9/11 of a Jewish woman in New York City that's being interviewed who's smiling and like happy. And they're like, "Why are you smiling?" And she basically says on camera live to the world, now America will know what we all deal with in Israel.
Well, big catastrophe, and I'm Israeli, and I hope that now people understand what we have to deal with, the kind of people that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Now America knows how it feels. And she's stoked. And there's no shortage of, you can, it's not hard to find Israeli people that are happy to give Americans a dose of the terrorism that Israelis live with.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so that's where you start to get this missing link of like, that is an ally that would be okay with helping do this thing for the greater good, obviously, because we need to go after Iraq and stabilize the Middle East for Israel's protection, all this stuff. And so I suspect that it was sort of like feed the idea to the patsy, Osama bin Laden and his networks. And whether they were working with Osama to be like, we will protect you through this or not, or whether they were just like, and make Osama think he's doing it all on his own, and then they're just sort of in the shadows around him to make sure it works. I think that they sort of like walked the ball to the end of the court and then held everyone back while they kicked it through the goal, and then quickly scrambled and covered everything up to be like, see, it was just those Muslim terrorists.
Such a massive operation.
It's a massive operation.
Do you think
unreal.
Do you think they, if that's true, do you think they meant for the buildings to collapse?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Because here's the thing. I'm asking that question because you can accomplish the same thing without the buildings collapsing.
Well, what is the same thing?
Going to war.
That's not the only thing they needed to accomplish. I suspect that there were things in those buildings that needed to collapse, as in there was an awful lot of financial records in Building 7. There was an awful lot of financial records in that specific piece of the Pentagon that plane hit. That hit Donald, the office that was crunching the numbers on the missing money that Donald Rumsfeld had just talked about like Pentagon's missing like 2-point-something trillion dollars. Right? And it just so happens to hit a secret wing, like a part of the Pentagon where Donald Rumsfeld has like sort of a secret program running to like audit the thing. Like, and like in this that plane that hit the Pentagon, this dude that could not fly a Cessna apparently hijacks a like 747 or whatever, this big passenger plane, and flies it in this crazy arc, 360-degree spiral to come down at ground level, just skimming the ground over top of a city and like fly it directly, curving parallel to hit right into the side of like a flat little building.
Wow.
Right into the wall of it. That's not possible.
If they meant to hit that part of the Pentagon.
Well, I mean, they meant to hit the Pentagon, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's a very complicated flight path that you can't just pull out of your ass. Is when you start to actually dig into the data, like the details of what happened. Like, for example, there's this whole consortium of architects and engineers that have been studying this and exposing it ever since, called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Their website is ae911truth.com. And they have compiled like hundreds of hours of footage and reports, documentation, testimony from professional architects and engineers, all about how it is structurally impossible. It's not possible for those buildings to collapse in that way. That was clearly controlled demolition that was assisted by some sort of pyrotechnic or explosive devices inside the buildings. And they have evidence in every direction, from studying the dust that shows little red flakes that seem to be some sort of nanothermitic kind of material that it's hard to analyze, but clearly there's like something in the dust that shows thermite style reactions. And then it's like the steel all gets shipped away, so we can't study the steel. But when you study like other, like for example, steel framed towers, so like they came up with this complex explanation for how steel framed towers, we discovered that there's this like physics thing that when you hit a steel frame tower and you get a fire in the right way, the way they were built around this like steel core with the outsides, it's like, we just didn't realize that there can be this shearing effect that can just cause it all to go perfectly
down.
Which is like, like let's look at other steel frame constructions that have been hit by things before. And I just discovered this recently. I'm actually working on a report about 9/11 right now. There was a building in Poland, I think it was, in Warsaw, that during the Warsaw Rebellion in World War II, this is one of the earlier steel-framed towers in the world. So you would think it would be less well-constructed than the Trade Centers, right? And it was something like, I don't know, it was like not nearly as tall, but it was tall. It was like, 13 to 30 stories, And it became a like important piece of this rebellion back against the Nazis, where they like took it back over and flew this flag from it. And so like the Nazis were like bombarding the out of it. And they shelled it with like hundreds of tons of mortar fire. Yeah. And you can see there's this famous photo afterwards where the whole building is like crooked and all of the concrete has been blown off of it. And it's essentially just the steel frame with little pieces of concrete holding onto it. And it is still standing. And they have straightened it out and rebuilt it. And it's like still good. And it was hit by like thousands of shells of mortar fire. That's like steel frame construction. The Empire State Building was hit by a B-2 bomber back in the 40s, I think it was. You can find photos of it. And it just like puts a hole in it. And obviously the building was fine.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas Building 7, apparently debris from the trade centers hits Building 7, starts an office fire. And then Building 7 is just like,
I give up.
And the BBC reports on it in advance. And they're like standing there talking about how Building 7 has just collapsed. And in the background of the footage is Building 7 standing up.
Oh my God.
So they reported it like 30 minutes early.
Oh my God.
So there's all these things that just show a cover-up of something. And when you start to ask what's that something, the only explanations have to involve other intelligence agency operations, some sort of deep state operation, something going on. And so you start to ask, like, how could you possibly cover all that up? How could you possibly pull that many strings?
Well, maybe that's the whole point of it. They wanted to do something so big that they're like, this is impossible.
A lie so big that it can't be believed.
Exactly.
But there's another piece, and this is part of the report I'm working on right now, is that now we know that that was at the heyday of Epstein's influence in this country. That was the peak of Epstein's political blackmail operation.
Interesting.
Right? And so if you have Israel conducting a piece of this complex, multifaceted terror attack on U.S. soil, and you have Jeffrey Epstein operating at the same time with his talons, certainly in the Clinton White House, although by now it's Bush. But if you look at Bush's White House, it was just Israel firsters everywhere, all around. It was just a giant neocon convention. And you've got Jeffrey Epstein blackmailing like bankers and tech people and media people and government people. It's like, I don't know where the connection is, but I can't imagine it's a coincidence that they managed to cover up the biggest political cover-up, the biggest scandal in American history at the time.
Maybe that's how they got so many people to keep their mouth shut.
That's what I would assume, is that a lot of key players, I would assume.
There's videotapes of them with kids.
That were in on that cover-up. I think they were probably blackmailed to help. Because it's like, how do you convince an American to knowingly help cover that up?
Unless you got something on them.
Yeah. Or if you threaten my kids, that's like the other way that if you threaten me with something that can tear my life apart so much that I lose my wife and kids, or you just directly threaten my wife and kids, that's like the only two situations where I could imagine taking part in something like that. And even then, you're maybe a little questionable.